Hi everyone, I'm Jeremy Goodwin, Head of Pensions at Evershed Sutherland. Thanks for listening to Pensions in a Pod, a podcast where we take a look at the latest developments in the pensions world. What we really wanted to share with you here is our insights in terms of what we believe really matters, what's really going on here. Hello again everyone, and happy February. As you look out the window here, will it ever stop raining? Amidst the gloom of the weather and the stories on the news, we thought, what better way to cheer up you, our happy listeners, than to address some key changes coming through in pensions tax? Yes, it's true, pension lawyers really do know how to have fun. So, any budget wouldn't be a UK budget without speculation about pensions tax. But what we've now got coming down on the horizon are really some pretty significant changes. So schemes and employers are obviously working hard to try and get to grips with the three key things that we saw in the last budget on pensions. What we wanted to try and do today was to circle back round, certainly kind of two of the three of those, and give a bit of time and really try and get into some of the key points we're seeing coming through on both of those too. Got James Ellis and Charlotte Cartwright and our team joining us to explore these points. Now, I mentioned there are three key things in the last budget. So we had the salary sacrifice points. So that was the cap on the national insurance contributions on pension salary sacrifice contributions coming through from 6th of April 2029. Now, I know our regular listeners will be saying, oh, no, what is it? You've already covered that. And it's true, we did. So in the podcast that we did following the last budget, we picked that up and went into that in some detail. So we're not planning to pick that up today, but please do go onto our website and you'll see all our different podcasts we've done in this Pensions in a Pod series are all grouped together, and you'll easily better see the one on salary sacrifice after the last budget there. But the two we haven't covered in so much detail are the changes for IHT and the new surplus lump sums to members. And so I really wanted to focus on those today. Quick recap, people would be aware, on IHT, from the 6th of April 27, most unused pension fund and death benefits are going to be included in someone's estate for IHT purposes, and so ending that kind of long-running exemption. That's many schemes are having really working hard at that from a practical perspective right now, and we'll come back round that shortly in relation to further questions and thoughts. And the other one in relation to surplus lump sums. So clearly, for the first time from April 27, well-funded DB schemes being able to pay surplus funds directly to members as a lump sum. And so again, just be interested to see where we're getting to in relation to the policy thinking by schemes and employers in relation to that. So without further ado, so James, on the IHT stuff, what are we still waiting for? So what's uncertain at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And just looking outside, I can actually see some sun, which is coming out just
What?
specifically for this IHT section.
Lifting the view
Very
already. Very good.
exactly, very timely. So in terms of uncertainties, there are, I'm afraid, a few, and I think that that's probably been feeding into a number of schemes, kind of just really adopting a bit of a wait and see approach. There have been quite a number of changes in the area. Just to pick out a few, I guess, key points where there's some uncertainties. One of the key ones is around actually death in service benefits. So the policy intention seems to be that all death in service benefits should be excluded, but it's not clear that that's actually what the legislation in front of us says, because that refers to active members. So what happens if you've got a death in service benefit paid to a deferred member? Or how does that read across to standalone life assurance schemes, which many employers will operate? So there is some genuine uncertainty there. There are also a number of more kind of technical uncertainties around the legislation, exactly kind of how things are going to really work in practice. So, for example, with the withholding notice, it's not clear how that interacts with IHT and interest paid on the wider estate. So those assets which aren't subject to the trustees' kind of remit or knowledge. And I've also seen kind of continued calls for kind of more fundamental aspects of the regime to be changed. So, for example, at the moment, interest kicks in after 6 months of members' death, and I've seen that that's been suggested that that should extend to 12 months.
So just come in there. So
yeah, sure.
that kind of 6 months, 12 months thing, obviously to date, trustees in relation to the exercise of discretion for lump sums have normally had 2 years to try and decide. And in my experience, actually, have often needed a kind of time period of up to that because it's often not simple how these kind of benefits are paid. So there's a lot of detailed work and investigations and deliberations in relation to this. So how are we seeing that coming through in practice in relation to that exercise of discretion as against this, certainly 6 months at the moment timescale for interest to be charged on inheritance tax?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, the interest itself is penal interest. You know, it's a lot of interest. So that
Eight, 8%, is that right?
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
So you could easily see a situation where if the trustees are seen to have potentially caused a delay which has resulted in interest, and that might not be a delay from the trustees' perspective because they've got to do their fact finding. But you could see a situation where somebody could say, well, actually, if you'd made your decision quicker, trustees, we wouldn't have been having to pay interest on that. So that's kind of, I guess, point one. Point two on discretions is I've seen quite a lot of discussion and consideration as to whether actually discretions like that trustees have in relation to death benefit lump sums will actually survive the changes to the regime. So at the moment, trustees will be aware that you kind of normally have to find out about members' families, look at their expression of wish form, financial dependency. And the whole point of setting it up under that type of discretionary trust would so it be exempt from IHT. Trustees who have had to deal with these discretions will also know that it can be very time consuming, complicated, and is also a really common source of member complaints. Often if people think that if they're named on the expression of wish, then they should get the money. But because that's going to become irrelevant from next April, either the lump sum is going to be within or outside the scope of IHT. I've seen some schemes starting to think about whether they want to continue to have a discretion. Do trustees want to still have some control and say over where the money goes? Or actually, would it streamline the position, and particularly in view of the interest and the timescales, in actually having it so that the payment goes straight to the estate, for example? So it would be really interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously it's only from April 27, so we really don't have long now for these quite fundamental thought processes, if you like, to be gone through. So that's interesting. Shall I can come bring you in at this stage in relation to the surplus stuff? I guess similar kind of question in terms of do we have the detail that we need at the moment, or is there still a lot yet to come?
So in surplus, generally, there's still quite a lot of information that we're still waiting for, but things are moving on. And this session is particularly focused on tax. And actually, interestingly, there's two parts to the surplus changes. Half of it we already know the tax piece to. The other half, we're still working through exactly what the requirements are going to be for that tax piece to be met. So if we start first with trustees paying amounts from surplus to the sponsor. As I say, that piece, we do already know the tax change. It happened back in April 2024 when the authorised surplus payments charge was reduced from 35% to 25%. There is still an open question about what we actually apply that 25% to, and hopefully we'll usefully get some clarification around that. But as I say, the actual tax change itself has happened. And that was seen by many as the government's promise, its commitment to things to come when it comes to surplus simplification. And they have kept that promise. And that's what we see in the pension schemes bill, where we're now looking at the tests that you apply for when you can return surplus to sponsors and how that's looking like it's changing. The other half, we are still waiting for the details on, and that's the new lump sum payments for members. That should be in force, ready to be used with related guidance in 2027, alongside the changes to surplus use for sponsors. Now, the idea with that is that this new form of one-off lump sum to members will be authorised for tax purposes. So it will no longer attract adverse tax consequences, and they'll be taxed as pensions income at a member's marginal rate. But importantly, under these proposals, that's only going to be available for members over normal minimum pension age. So that's generally age 55 at the moment. And that's one of the uncertainties about how and whether or not that will change as the government's thinking on those reforms change. Because for now, under those reforms, anyone under age 55 will still fall back on the existing regime, so they can't actually receive those payments.
Thanks, Charlotte. I've opened talking to the Master Trust universe that they're very interested in these changes in terms of thinking about how DB schemes with surplus can actually release some of that surplus, which feels like it's going to be a DC benefit. But then how you do that, so particularly if what we're going to try and do is set up kind of little lump sums for DB deferred members to also have a sort of DC pot set on the side somehow. And so Master Trust Industry, I think you're very interested in terms of whether we're going to get transfers of surplus from DB schemes into DC Master Trust for them to have kind of separate DC pots in DC Master Trust sat alongside their DB scheme. Are you seeing that? Is that thinking that's on your radar, and where is that right now?
So I think there's a couple of different things that are being looked at. There's first of all, involving master trusts, there's first of all actual using transfers from schemes, but from occupational pension schemes of surplus to be used to meet contributions into master trusts. That's something that's being done already. We don't need regulatory change for it, but actually some changes to the Finance Act in particular could be quite useful to avoid some of the more clunky aspects of how those processes are happening at the moment. The other piece, as you say, is what do you actually do with these member lump sums? So particularly, as I said before, if at the moment the proposals say that they'll only be payable to people over normal minimum pension age, what happens if that changes and the government says actually you can start granting it under normal minimum pension age, either to pay out immediately to people or to hold in your scheme? What does that actually look like, particularly for DB schemes that won't, I'm sure, be particularly keen to create new DC benefits in their own arrangement that will then attract requirements around chair statements, etc. So that's when we have to be a bit more creative around what we're doing with those and where we house those and how we transfer the funds for them, which is where the idea around master trust comes from, as you say.
That's really useful, Charlotte. Thank you. So, James, if I can come back to you. So, last little quick fire round. You are the trustees of the scheme, thinking about these IHT changes coming through. What would be on your top 2 or 3 things to be thinking about and doing right now?
Yeah, so I'd probably suggest 3 key actions here. First action would be to review the scheme rules and work out what benefits are potentially in scope. And actually, what I've seen for schemes that have done this so far is you might actually find that there are only a very limited number of benefits which are caught, particularly for a DB scheme. So actually that could be quite reassuring. Conversely, of course, you could find the opposite and you could find that actually lots of benefits are caught, but you won't know that until you've done the review. So I would suggest doing the review. Second point is really to understand from your administrators and start discussing with them about how this is going to work in practice, whether there are any knock-on implications on your contract with them and any cost implications. I think that there is going to be a much greater burden on administrators and trustees going forwards in supporting personal representatives with these issues. So making sure the processes are in place both to comply with the legislation, but also to kind of liaise with personal representatives in an efficient manner is going to be really important. And then the third action I'd suggest is to start thinking about both member and employee communication. So what should you be doing now to tell people about the changes? And things like, should you be updating your expression of wish forms to alert members about these upcoming changes, just in case you have a situation where they nominate a child now, but actually had they known about the change, they might not have nominated them. They might have nominated their spouse, being out of scope. So just to try and kind of mitigate risks of people making decisions and nominating people on kind of potentially false premises. And I guess we are just over a year away from this. I think next April will come around pretty quickly for everyone. It feels like a long way away at the moment, but it will come around quickly. So I think the sooner you can start thinking about all of this now and putting in a plan to comply, the better.
Spot on. Thanks, James. And Charlotte, same question to you.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. And as I was listening to James talking, it strikes me that the surplus piece is actually quite different to IHT. The IHT changes are very new, but with the surplus piece, these are really helpful additions to trustee and sponsor tool belts, particularly in areas like discussions on discretionary pension increases. But what they really do is add to the existing landscape, because fundamentally trustees and sponsors are already using surplus, whether that's to fund contributions in scheme or through transfers to third-party arrangements, in surplus sharing arrangements, etc. But they're really important to be aware of, and they are forming part of many trustee and sponsor discussions happening now on valuations, on scheme journey plans, on endgame planning, etc. So it's really important for trustees and sponsors to be aware of this and to monitor what's happening, where it's going, how it might develop, who these new surplus powers will apply to, what the tests are, what they look like in relation to your scheme. I also expect these changes are being watched with some interest by broader stakeholders. So, for example, on M&A deals, perhaps those groups, those companies with DB schemes might be becoming a bit more attractive now, and particularly when you add all of these surplus reforms to recent developments like the Stagecoach transaction that do just start to hint at those broader possibilities there.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's fab. Everyone, that's a real tax tour de force today. So I hope you've enjoyed that and you gained something from it. Any kind of questions and comments, or please do get in touch with us. Always very keen to hear any feedback or questions and comments coming from this. So please do make this a live forum for us all, just to keep on learning about these things and keep on thinking about these developments coming through. Just think about that sort of wider engagement. So one for your calendars. So the 6th of May here at 1 Wood Street, we've got our pensions conference. So please do come along in the morning for that. And in terms of having a greater sense also in terms of where things are going across the pensions law landscape with all the plethora of changes coming through right now, please do make sure you've downloaded our UK pensions tracker, which really does keep you up to speed with everything that's going on across the pensions landscape at the moment. So I hope it's been useful. Next month, we'll be touching on Virgin Media and the new guidance coming through on Section 37. So it's one to very much look forward to. And in the meantime, we hope that you'll keep on listening to these and do stay in touch. Thanks all for listening to this latest Pensions in a Pod episode. To access previous episodes, please have a look at our website, on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, where you can find them all stored for your enjoyment. We look forward to coming back to you in a month's time to give you the latest insights on what's really going on in the legal pensions landscape.